Hi, we are going to have a lot of fun today. I have an adventure game that's unusually for the genre very non-linear, a spy shooter that's just like the best James Bond ever, while not being James Bond or Metal Gear Solid either, a puzzler that's faster and more action-packed than many shooters, an Amiga game that looks and plays like something from SNES, and also a newer indie title that's one of the best you ever had the chance to experience. It's a packed episode today, so let's jump right in. There are many things that are unstoppable. The anger that consumes Bruce Banner and turns him into Hulk, the taxation of individuals, some politicians when they manage to get a little power, the force of stupidity when it lays its roots in someone, or even diarrhea when it starts. It has to come to an end naturally, and you can't just cut its runtime mid-through, terrible pun intended. And also Mr. Domino. He too apparently cannot be stopped. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino is one of those super special games that released on Sony PlayStation during the heights of its popularity. And since it was a system that moved such an obscene number of units, the devs felt free experimenting, and hence why we've received so many unusual and cool games that I had the pleasure of talking about in this Forgotten Treasures series of videos. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino, which I'm gonna call Mr. Domino from now on, is a quirky fun puzzle game in which you're controlling an anthropomorphic domino man. And one that has the earlier mentioned case of the runs, the domino runs in this case though, dropping the bricks behind like there's no tomorrow. The entire gameplay idea is based off 3 fundamentals. First of all 6 levels that the game is composed of are all set up like circular racetracks upon which you're completing laps. And no, despite what it may sound like, Mr. Domino is not a racer. It's just arranged like that only, but we'll get to the reasoning behind it in a minute. Secondly, Mr. Domino can literally never stop, and he keeps running constantly as if he had holiday weight to lose, never stopping for anything or anyone. Thirdly and lastly, Mr. Domino is really a collectathon, with a twist to the formula as you're really not picking up anything ever, but instead trigger numerous micro-puzzle events. You do so by dropping dominoes in front of them, and when they topple, they launch that particular thing. And it can be anything from a weird, very Japanese TV-like animation of exclamation marks coming off of a box of cereal, through launching of fireworks or rockets, a table falling through a window of a high-rise building, all the way to the bomb exploding in a stove. Seems random, I know, and it kinda is, but it's cool to experience for the first couple of times. These are not the puzzles themselves naturally, but just the quirky outcomes of them being solved. The puzzle is how to lap around the levels and launch them all within given time. What paths to take to do so best. Because while you may not be able to stop like ever, it doesn't mean that your run cannot be affected by the outside factors. And the quote-unquote puzzle events are often followed by reset, slowdown, trip buttons and others that you don't want to run over and activate as they do not help you in the slightest. The gameplay is very fast, fun and addictive when you learn it, and you will have to learn it and it will take a minute. It's a given. But when you do eventually, you'll not only have a blast but also realize that you can create points combos with how you launch the puzzles by leaving the trail of your dominoes behind. And why is that important, you may wonder? Well, there are only 6 levels in Mr. Domino, and it's because in essence, while being an arcade puzzler, it's really a score attack kind of a game, where finding the shortest, fastest and best scoring pathways and forming combos is a key to success. Whenever you complete a particular stage, so when you've laid all the dominoes already and are ready to check if you've done it right, the animation of all these dominoes toppling plays out, showing how you did and launching all these humorous events you were setting up triggers for. They are uniquely Japanese and fun to watch a couple of times, but when you get used to them and have seen them a dozen of times or so, Mr. Domino will evolve into just a puzzler for points. An unusual, cute-looking and innovative playing one perhaps, but one nonetheless. It's not a game that will owe you with its graphics, sound and music design or even variety of animations, as while these are unlike anything you've seen in other games, they are rather limited in number. It is however a very weirdly enchanting title and definitely a sleeper hit that just never got to wake up and grab what it was owed by the gaming community. So since you never gave it a chance back then, fix it today and try it out. Syphon Filter is the weirdest titled game in today's video. No wait, there's one that's even weirder named actually a bit later on. So it's the second weirdest one, hardly an achievement. Anyway, it's also a third-person action shooter in which you play as Gabe Logan, a James Bond-like agent employed by the US government and on a mission to find the missing fellow agent, Alice. So Gabe partners up with female agent Liang Xing and they head off to investigate a German terrorist group known as Black Baton that's led by Eric Raymer. Their findings prove that sadly Alice was killed and Eric Raymer hidden numerous viral bombs around Washington DC, threatening to detonate them. So it's up to our sexy heroic duo to follow the trail of the explosives across the city and dismantle the evil organization, all the while preventing the catastrophe. As epic as it sounds, it's barely a beginning of the game, as there's much more that awaits to you on this grandiose adventure. You will travel the world, uncovering details of this huge international conspiracy and leaving a steady and growing in numbers trail of bodies behind. You know, like alarmingly huge number of corpses. Syphon Filter was originally made with intention of starting a whole new super spy franchise, one that would seemingly mix elements of action, stealth and puzzle solving. And for the most part, they've actually nailed it, as by the time that you're watching this video, it comprises of 7 individual releases and 2 compilations. There hasn't been a new game released in the series since 2007, but most that did before scored quite high and were well liked by gamers. Syphon Filter feels a lot like a movie, or an action TV series really, in which each of the missions is a single episode with its own plot, objectives, location, enemies and team. So sometimes you'll be cutting through what feels like an army worth of enemies, putting them down one by one like a boss, using more different weapons than you've seen in a single game for years. Other times you'll be cautiously avoiding being discovered, moving in stealth, and producing considerably smaller piles of dead flesh with use of silenced weaponry. You'll also have to escort and protect friendly AI from time to time too, and while they're not perhaps jumping in front of the flying bullets as if they wanted to meet with Jesus, they're also not the smartest that you've seen. And finally, some missions will keep you in pitch black, wearing night vision goggles and trying to survive the onslaught of, yes, you guessed it right, future victims of your uncanny skills. Try as you might, but certain comparisons to greats of the super agent genre of games cannot be avoided, and 007 GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid most definitely come to mind. And I have to say that despite sharing similarities with both, mostly with Metal Gear Solid, Syphon Filter comes out as a unique game and doesn't feel like it was made to copy either. Its action-packed explosive gameplay, multiple objectives per mission, the locations that you'll get to visit around the world, and how the plot unveils, all feel new and interesting all the way through. So if you liked either of the titles and you're looking for something new and equally as good, Syphon Filter is definitely a game for you to check out. King's Quest VI Heir Today Gone Tomorrow is probably my most favorite game in the entire King's Quest series. It's the last game to also have an Amiga release and a floppy disk version for PC, because all future King's Quest games came out on CDs only. It was the first to use professional Hollywood voice acting, specifically Robbie Benson, known for being the voice of Beast in Disney's Beauty and the Beast, as our protagonist Prince Alexander. So as you can see, it was a fundamental release for many reasons, not just an increasingly higher number plastered next to its title. Anyway, King's Quest VI is naturally a point-and-click adventure game and a love child that spawned from cooperation between legendary Miss Roberta Williams, who was responsible for most of the best early Sierra's games, and at the time newcomer to Sierra, Jane Jensen. And if the name rings a bell and you're not sure why, which tower the sound is coming from, and whether you're hearing it at all and not just imagining it, let me set you straight. She's the one who's behind all the future Gabriel Knight games. So yeah, she too, at least as soon as she got a chance to spread her wings, created some of the most memorable and important games in the genre ever made. The idea the ladies had for this entry was to keep it in line with previous games, all the while involving players emotionally with their characters, and to a certain degree, I think they've pulled it off. I mean, it's not on the level of First Life is Strange or Detroit Become Human games, but it's definitely a good attempt. And these two titles were made with tingling on your emotional strings in mind, touching very personal subjects and often asking difficult and emotionally charged questions. We're not here to talk about them today though, but King's Quest VI, so let's get back on track. Once again you're playing as Prince Alexander of Daventry, but this time he's starting his adventure in a pickle, or in a brine-filled jar after said pickle, as that's also how his mood is, sour. He's drowning in his emotions and sees no way out to the surface. He's clearly in deep, oh so deep love with Princess Cassima, whom he met while being imprisoned in a previous game. But it's the distance between them that is causing him a lot of pain and anguish. And especially that he's not really sure where exactly in the kingdom known as the Land of Green Isles she is. And yeah, the Isles part here is literally plural, so pinpointing a particular island and then location on it without GPS tracker on Cassima is rather troublesome. And since it's a game from 1992 taking place in the medieval fantasy times in fantasy lands, GPS of any kind is not really an option. I mean, if you know mermaids, vamp maids or any other hybrids that do well in water and on the land too, and have been here and there, then yeah, chances are you could perhaps locate someone that way. But other than that, you're left to your own devices when searching for a person in the fairy tales kingdoms. Our prince naturally knows no one. I mean, he knows quite a few folks, his royal chef, couple of maids and a butler, but no one that could help him out of this proverbial sour-filled jar. So he decides not to wait for the miracle and take his destiny into his own hands. He sails to find Cassima is what I'm saying here, and it took a while. How long exactly? Hard to tell, but the onset of the scurvy he was suffering from would no doubt take most of his teeth if he'd spend another week or two on the seas. Now, all that sounds like he'd found the island and safely landed on it, but the reality was quite different. Dramatically different, one could say, because while Alexander did found an island, perhaps the island, a huge and unexpected storm did with his ship what you usually do with piles of flyers you find in your mailbox, so crumbled it and tossed it aside like a used rag. When he got himself together, he realized that he was the only survivor of the storm. What's more, as he was about to learn soon after, not only the king and queen of the land of Green Isles have passed away, but also Princess Cassima was seemingly held captive by the evil royal vizier. And Alexander, arriving alone, barely surviving and having literally no backup whatsoever, will have an adventure and a half ahead of him to figure out what happened and to save his beloved. Now say what you want about Roberta, but she could craft a suspense like no other. The most interesting thing about King's Quest VI, however, other than the fun gameplay that is how the game was designed. Namely, almost half of all the puzzles are entirely optional. Many of them have more than one solution, and thanks to the title's fully open-world design, they can be completed in any order. Even better, more or less midway through the game, you'll be able to choose to follow the longer, more puzzle-oriented or shorter story path. The longer culminates in more satisfying game ending, but many of the parts of the ending are based on the choices taken throughout the game, so they can vary considerably with each playthrough if different riddles are solved, and especially if they're completed in different ways. And shorter? Well, it's simpler and shorter. And a good pick if you want to complete the story and not get as much of the fun of the game as it's possible, but just get the gist of what it's all about. While King's Quest VI is nowhere near the best adventure game of 1992, that title would still probably go to Indiana Jones in my eyes, it's definitely one of the more interesting and unusually designed ones. I own Stardew Valley on nearly all systems it released on, short of maybe of PlayStation 5, but given that I have it on Series X, it made no sense getting it once more on a big console. But on PC, somehow, I've no idea how really, I have it on all platforms it released on. Perhaps it's because it's such an amazing little game that I subconsciously wanted to be sure to be able to play it whenever I felt like it, regardless of the system I had on at the time. So Switch, laptop, my gaming PC, Steam Deck or whatever, I just gotta have a copy on all of these. And while it may sound like I'm a fanatic, a loony really, and someone who should be locked away for his own good, I've never actually completed it. I've played it dozens of times on all of these systems but never got to the very end. And it's because I never really tried. I always treated, and still do actually, Stardew Valley as this retro-themed and Harvest Moon-inspired farm management/RPG mixture that's excellent to relax, spend some hours into to forget about the world around you, and just reset from all the troubles of your daily life. And I'm happy to report that it works as intended, to a degree obviously. And it also looks so goddamn charming, it's painful. Anyway, Stardew Valley is an open-ended fantasy life/farming simulation with RPG elements and a fun little story to follow to boot. You play as a young adult who inherited a plot of land and a small house in a tiny village of Pelican Town located in the picturesque titular Stardew Valley. You'll learn all of that in the first 5 minutes, just to be then left to your own devices to, well, I suppose live out your best farmland life. So you start with this unusable land that's near completely covered in twigs, stumps, trees, stones, weeds and all kinds of debris, and requires a lot of work to clean up. Some things you'll be able to remove straight away, provided you have the right tools, while the others may require getting better equipment, which you'll get access to later on by crafting them at the local blacksmith. He has a certain requirements when it comes to ingredients for these tools, so you'll need to mine or find them first. Or both. Whichever the way you come in possession of this is unimportant for as long as you do. But when you do eventually and get better gear, the entire land will be yours and yours only to do whatever you please with it. So you can plant and cultivate numerous crops, which naturally after harvesting you can use for cooking or to sell off, you can erect numerous different buildings and get into animal husbandry too, naturally profiting from your wares along the way. And while all of it may sound suspiciously like, well, work, trust me when I tell you that this kind of work you'll love doing, at least in this cute pixel graphics digital format. Soon enough, before you even notice, you'll have different crops growing, you'll run around collecting eggs from your chicken, milking your cows, fishing, and we'll have a lot of fun performing all kinds of these farm-like activities. But, and that's probably the most important thing about the game, as much as all of that is relaxing, fun, and offers a dopamine kick like you wouldn't expect from a bunch of colorful pixels, sometimes, not very often, but sometimes, you may need, nay, want something else. You know, to offer a new and different challenge to be the palette cleaner from all the vegetable gardening, if you will. And that's when the town and procedurally generated dungeons will come in. The first, so town, is naturally where you have the shops and numerous other services like blacksmith, pub and the likes. and you'll spend a lot of time there too, using these amenities and also familiarizing yourself with all the town's inhabitants. What's more, spending time and talking with them may offer unique pathways for progression, allowing you to form bonds of friendship and often even love. In fact, you can get married in the game too, and it's totally up to you whose heart you'll lie your way in. Who you'll seduce. Who you'll talk into it. Who you'll NLP into marriage. Who you'll scare into it. Oh man, I'm not doing myself any favors here, am I? I obviously meant who you'll have falling in love with you. Yep, that's the one. It may happen quite fast and spontaneously, or it may take a long time and work. Because people are different, even if they're made out of ones and zeros. The town is also the place where you'll get different quests to fulfill. These usually offer extra money, allow you to complete bundles of items which are required for progress, open new map areas for exploration, or unlock town's extra features. Which, are as useful as they are fun to have access to. Since Stardew Valley runs on an in-game clock, dividing your day into hours and year in 4 28-days long seasons, you'll have to keep an eye on it too, for a variety of reasons. For one, there are a lot of communal events happening in and around the town, and they usually do on specific dates and times. And if you want to participate, you'll need to be then and there. Most of them are in the form of story bits or mini-games, and both are rather beneficial to your character's long-term progress. Time is also crucial for farming, as all crops have their particular cultivation and harvesting seasons, and time it takes from them to mature. And you have to keep it all in mind when deciding what to plant and when. Your character also needs to sleep to regain stamina for the next day, so getting to bed in timely manner is something you have to get used to, as not getting enough sleep has rather serious consequences. Both in-game and in real life, which I can pretty much assure you is not a joke. Other than the town, there are randomly generated dungeons, well, a cave system I should say really, but it's so vast and deep that dungeon feels a bit more appropriate to me. And you get to find and battle many different monsters there, which is always fun. The true reason you're going down there, however, is to seek and collect raw materials that you either then use at the blacksmith to get / craft better equipment, or as parts of these bundles that I mentioned earlier, or just to sell them off for profit. And these dungeons feel very 16-bit SNES-ish in how you run around them killing monsters and collecting loot. In fact, the entire game looks and feels as if it was made and released 20 years earlier, all the while offering many quality of life improvements and mechanics. Stardew Valley is a game that theoretically can be quote-unquote completed, meaning that you can unlock all the content and finish the storyline. But it doesn't mean that you should push towards that goal relentlessly, or that the game ends when you do. It can still be played, and the most fun you'll have out of it will be from playing it, from immersing yourself in this small community, rather than by the reaching the very end of narrative. And especially that it can actually be played in online multiplayer, which naturally makes Stardew Valley so much more fun with others. Also, you can achieve much more in a day's work when there's more than one pair of hands on it. So one of you may be cleaning the land, the other may be taking care of currently growing crops, someone may be shopping, and someone else run around the dungeons, and that's barely scratching the surface of how big of a blast it will be playing it with others. Stardew Valley is incredible and well worth the time you'll spend playing it. Ruff'n'tumble sounds like a name for a Saturday morning cartoon from the 90s. It's rad, it's hip, it's cool, and whichever the else old-timey words you could use to describe it, but I just don't quite recall or know. It's all that. And actually, for once it really is. It's the most console-like looking game out of all that ever graced Commodore's magical system, at least in my eyes. It's a run-and-gun shooter platformer that breaks out of the timeless and well-known running and gunning formula, by not being the ultra-fast left-to-right fare only, and instead it's always scrolling and allows you to explore its huge levels filled with colorful and cute-looking robo-bodies in each and every direction. Other than that though, all the defining characteristics of the subgenre are kept and present within it, so most of all the running and gunning. And yeah, you'll do a lot of it around differently themed levels, shooting all manner of bad guys with variety of differently looking, working and powerful weapons. Laser pulse rifles, rapid-fire assault rifles or flamethrowers, you name it, they're all here and they feel amazing. The story behind Ruff'n'tumble is generic for the kind of the game that it is, but with some small twists here and there, and centers around you playing as Ruff, a teen who lost his marbles after going through a mystical portal leading to evil Dr. Destiny's alien planet. Why were you going there, you may wonder? Hard to tell, probably to challenge the villain and end his evil reign, but in the scope of the game and how it plays, it's actually irrelevant. The point is that while you were after him, you lost your biggest treasure, the marbles. Oh, and so that we're clear, I meant losing your marbles in the most literal sense of the word. You didn't go crazy or had an episode of any kind, they were really just round colorful glass marbles and you really lost them. And marbles in the early 90s were like those small round treasures to many of us. Today, they're at best choking hazards and at worst a lawsuit in the making. Anyway, from that point onward, you set off on a 16-level strong adventure to find all of the colorful balls of fun and defeat evil Dr. Stinkhead robots along the way. You know, the two birds kind of a scenario. The 16 levels are spread over 4 worlds of Forest, Caves, Factory and Dr. Destiny's Castle, with each next being considerably more challenging than the last. While the stages all look and feel uniquely, what you do in them never really changes, and it's naturally finding and collecting all of these RGB colored marbles and keys. And if that sounds like another collectathon, let me assure you, it is not. In fact, if you read between the lines and paid attention on what's on the screen, then what I said actually meant kill everything that moves and pick up everything that you can. When you manage to grab a particular required number of marbles, a door to the next stage will open and you'll be able to progress. Sounds simple, right? Well, it's anything but. Because other than the first couple of levels or so, ruff'n'tumble gets rather unforgiving really fast, throwing seemingly countless numbers of enemies at you from all sides all the time. And these are really something. A variety is definitely not the problem here. They can be small fast robots that headbutt you, they can be giant rifle carrying ones, they can run, jump, fly, and overall each level will introduce something new and interesting, and you'll never get bored when playing ruff'n'tumble. Fortunately, with as many different bodies as you'll have to face, you're not defenseless. And while your initial gun is rather weak, it has unlimited ammo and there are numerous upgrades scattered around the levels. These new tools of destruction are considerably more deadly and useful, and make the pew-pew-pewing feel more impactful and removal of evil robots a pure pleasure. On a side note, and it will be a side note that literally has nothing to do with the game other than me remembering it when talking about robots, I've recently seen a video of Ksenat and his friends on Twitter, yes, I am not calling it X, of them kicking and pushing his $70,000 worth humanoid robot for quote-unquote fun. Which would not be disturbing at all, given what I thought about the state of robotics these days, if at a certain point the robot wouldn't try to stand up and literally run away from them. And I realized that its AI is rather simple and definitely there's not much there in case of feelings inside, at least not yet, but the sense of self-preservation was not only eye-opening but also sorta terrifying. Showing both how humans can be terrible for no reason whatsoever, and also that the events of the Terminator may have some logical background behind them, and we in fact, while being creators of robots and AI, may also be the scourge of them, the world and ourselves. It goes without saying that I'm not a big fan of that particular streamer. Back to our game though, even armed with bigger and better weapons, ruff'n'tumble is an extremely demanding game, and to be successful in it, you'll need to take a bit different approach than the genre name suggests. So, while you will stick to gunning, no doubt about that, pew-pew-pew-pewing the enemies all the time all around you, running is not necessarily the best call. So, slow down, because in ruff'n'tumble, slower is actually much faster. If you're rolling your eyes at me because you're a master gamer, hackerman, or however else the true joystick assassins call themselves these days, then yeah, go ahead and run and gun. I dare you. As you can see, the presentation is definitely ruff'n'tumble's strongest suit. It's just incredible. It looks like a game that should be running on SNES or Sega Genesis, with all the colors, huge beautifully animated sprites and blast processing and whatnot. It doesn't feel like an Amiga title, and definitely not like one that could run on the most basic A500 with barely 1 MB of RAM. And yet it does, and only on the Amiga. And all of that because it's been a fun one. At least I had fun with it. So hopefully you did too. Either way, make sure to let me know in the comments below. And when you're down there, hit those likes, subscribe and bell icons too, so that you'll always be up to date when I release something new. For now though, take care of yourself, eat good food, believe in the power of a good video game and most importantly, have fun.